at Crosby Warren Hall in London, and an affiliated lecturer in history of art at the University of Cambridge. She previously served as a research and events convener at the Paul Mellon Centre, during which time this conference was conceived. And so, huge thanks to Rebecca for the time in the PMC, as well as this conference and all the other things she's had an impact on. So, Rebecca holds a PhD in history of art from the University of Cambridge and a BA in the history and theory of architecture from Columbia University. Her research focuses on changing relationships between architecture and landscape in 18th and 19th century Britain and its global empire under the influence of the picturesque movement. And all of these things come in different ways to the conference. So I also want to just point to the display that some of you might have already seen over at the Paul Mellon Centre that Rebecca's curated, called What Light Through Yonder Window Breaks. The window is protagonist in British architecture and visual culture. I'll let Rebecca say a few words about the display and everything else as well. So thank you.
Hello, everyone. Yesterday, we had a great video that showed us what to do in an emergency and where to relieve ourselves. There is no video today, so I'm going to act it out. This door is an emergency exit. So if the alarms go off, there's nothing scheduled for today. So if it goes off, you can just exit through here and it just goes straight out. You probably already saw, but there are loos, lots of loos between here and where you checked in. So the women's loos are right by the check-in desk, and then there are mixed loos between here and there. So I think that's everything I need to cover in terms of housekeeping. Well, anyway, so yes, welcome back to everyone who joined us yesterday, and a warm hello to those of you joining us with fresh eyes today. As Sria said, my name is Rebecca Tropp, and I'm currently the archivist at Crosby Moran Hall. And I know that many of you attended yesterday's talks, but I thought I'd introduce the thinking behind this symposium again for those of you who are just joining us today. So apologies that you will be hearing the same thing I said, but just so that we all kind of know where this came from. This winter marks 5 years since the outbreak of COVID-19, which is kind of crazy that it's been 5 years, but so time goes. So the pandemic emerged in December 2019 and arrived in the UK about a month later. In March of 2020, we here in the UK experienced our first lockdown, with windows becoming for many people, especially those living in flats or other homes without private outdoor spaces, heightened boundaries between inside and outside, between where one was allowed to be and where one was not meant to linger. We are, of course, very fortunate to have windows, as they bring in light and views, and when opened, fresh air, while simultaneously allowing us to keep out most of the weather in an increasingly unpredictable climate, be that driving winds and precipitation, with 2024 on track to be the hottest year on record. And I know I noted that that's somewhat ironic given that it is so cold this week. But these immediate topical associations are just two ways in which the window figures in our architectural surroundings and broader visual consciousness. Across visual media and architectural design, the window is central to a broad range of issues, including self-representation, privacy and security, surveillance and voyeurism, spiritual and religious symbolism, and technological and industrial innovation. Exactly 500 years ago, in 1524, Luigi da Porto wrote the novella upon which, via further adaptations, William Shakespeare would base his fateful Romeo and Juliet. What has come to be known as the balcony scene, with an illuminated window as its focal point, was introduced in da Porto's text and evidently held enough significance to trickle down to Shakespeare's play in a notably expanded form and with the famous lines uttered by Romeo, "What light through yonder window breaks? It is the east, and Juliet is the sun." As represented in paintings and prints of the scene, and as brought to life in set designs for theater, ballet, and film productions of the story, the window has played a starring role. And then somewhat closer to our time, this year also marks 70 years since Alfred Hitchcock's classic mystery thriller Rear Window was released in cinemas, a film in which the vast majority of scenes and their associated visceral tension take place looking out a window into neighboring windows, with the main character trapped helplessly on one side of the glass as he witnesses events unfolding outside it. And originally, when we were kind of planning this conference, I wanted to play music that was the themes of windows. And it turns out we have a piano in this room. So if anyone knows the theme tune to Rear Window, which is very catchy and very of the era, you have a few hours to figure it out and play it for us. As has become clear in organizing this event, windows are found in a huge variety of forms and play a vast multitude of roles. And so we are just exploring some of those. And today, well, following yesterday afternoon's 2 hybrid panels and curators talk, today will consist of 4 panels, and we're going to have a second curators talk. So panel 1, chaired by the Paul Mellon Center's head of grants, networks, and learning, Martin Myron, is entitled The Art of Display, From Museums to Shop Windows. Following a refreshment break, we will have panel 2, Architectural Manipulation, chaired by Jeremy Musson, who is somewhere in this room over there. After a 1-hour lunch break, hopefully it'll be more than an hour, but just kind of, we have some flexibility, but after a 1-hour lunch break, we will have panel 3 on transparency and materiality, chaired by Christina Faraday. And then following another refreshment break, we will round out these panels with panel 4, cinematic and literary horrors, chaired by Stephen Lauritano. It's always good to end on a horrific note. And then as we did yesterday, the chairs will introduce each speaker before they present, but we will hold all questions and discussion until the end of each panel. The day will conclude with a curator's talk between myself and Jennifer Slivka, and then I hope you will all join us for a drinks reception to continue the conversations that have developed across the past 2 days. So thank you. I'm going to turn it over now to Martin.
I was pausing carefully to allow a bit of applause for Rebecca for putting together such a fantastic program over these 2 days. Yes, I'm Martin Myron, and I'm here to welcome you to the opening session of day 2 of What Light Through Yonder Window Breaks. In this panel, we have 3 papers addressing the art of display from museums to shop windows. As with the conference as a whole, we will be hearing from scholars and curators representing an array of disciplinary orientations and engagements, with the window as protagonist within public and more intimate gallery spaces, and in relation to commercial display, the proverbial shop window. Viewing these from the perspectives of sociology, art and architectural history, visual culture studies, and anthropology. Each panelist has been invited to speak in turn for about 15 minutes, and we would ask you to keep questions and comments to the very end, when we should have a good time for Q&A, leading up to a refreshment break, well, certainly by 11:30. Our 3 speakers in order are Laura Harris, a cultural sociologist of art specializing in place and senior research fellow, University of Southampton, whose paper is entitled Art Gallery Windows. Then we have Alexandra Ault, who's here somewhere, I think. There we are. Yes. Alexandra Ault, lead curator of manuscripts, 1601 to 1850 at the British Library, whose research has centered on print trades and display of fine art prints in the 19th century, and whose paper is titled Reglazing the Print Shop Window, the Impact of Glass Technology on the Commercial Display of Fine Art Prints, circa 1850 to 1900. Finally, we have Birgitta Huse, over there, a social anthropologist and independent researcher working on material culture and visual anthropology, whose paper is More Than a Glimpse in Passing, reflecting on shop windows as provocateurs between art, commerce, and cultural traditions. You can find full biographies of our speakers on the PMC website, which you can find quite easily, and I think there's a QR code on the screen as well. Once again, do keep your questions for our speakers until the end, when there will be a roaming microphone, which we'd ask you to use. So now, over to Laura for Art Gallery Windows.
Thank you very much for the introduction and for the invitation and for the inspiring talks yesterday, which I've hurriedly written some references to in my talk today. So as introduced, I'm a cultural sociologist. That might make me a bit of an outlier here. As introduced, I'm employed by the University of Southampton, but I live in Liverpool, as will become eminently clear. My interest is primarily in the everyday life of cultural institutions and their built form, as well as the notion of the public. And that is what I'll be speaking to today, drawing on a very, very early stage research project. concerning Tate Liverpool. So in 2023, Tate Liverpool closed its doors to open its windows. If you were to go to the Albert Dock, the home of the Tate of the North, has anyone been to Albert Dock? Okay, lots of nods. Good. I'm not talking into, you all know what I'm talking about. If you were to go there today, you would be greeted by this shuttered building on the left. There's surprisingly little visible building work, despite the fact that the £27 million redesign is due to open next year. If you were to go to the Albert Dock next year, you'd be greeted by this animated building on the right. You'd join this speculative public loitering in and around this repurposed warehouse. And although they don't have planning permission yet for these trees, one can imagine themselves into this rarefied and idealized public space, public realm. This supposed refuge for art amidst the raging winds of the neighboring River Mersey and the screams and swoops of the ever-present seagulls. If you were to have gone to the Albert Docks in the 1940s, you would have found a complex of abandoned warehouses, no longer serving an industrial purpose and no longer directly capitalizing on the labor of enslaved people. You might have also chanced upon James Stirling as a student in the city, future architect of Tate Liverpool, taking these photos of the abandoned buildings and the way the sun reflects off their windows. Finally, if you were to have visited the Albert Dock in the 1980s, you would have noticed the windows of the future Tate Liverpool shedding panes of glass like scales, leaving only an emptying leaded grid. Block C of the Colonnades building seen here was earmarked for Tate Liverpool, and James Stirling had been recruited to transform the building into the first Tate Gallery outside London. One of his biggest interventions would be to brick up many of these windows. At this moment in time, the Albert Dock was poised on the tides of urban and cultural change in the UK and beyond. Shortly after the civil unrest that we heard about from Albie yesterday, the Albert Dock was set to be the beneficiary of Tate and policymakers' newfound interest in culture-led regeneration of post-industrial space. The changing fortunes of this building can be told through its windows. However, its windows also form part of a broader story of how art gallery windows have been instrumental in the changing convention of how art gets seen, shared, and made public throughout history. Art gallery architecture has been studied by sociologists and others for how it shapes social interaction and meaning-making on the ground in these spaces, situated in time and place, and how it manifests power in these densely storied cultural institutions. These windows can also be read, art gallery architecture can also be read about against the mutable concept of the public, what that means and the symbolic form that it takes. As we heard yesterday from Ellie, windows and glass as an architectural material has associations with permeability as a public good. However, the public is not a given thing, but rather a set of discourses, social groupings, conventions, and values that change over time and space. Windows do not make a building public, but they help to carry associations of publicness. Like Benet said yesterday, transparency is necessarily frustrated. It's an aesthetic ideal. So if transparency is necessarily frustrated, then what does it mean to use it as an architectural symbol of publicness? This choice of windows helped to create the symbolic and sensory atmospheric conditions, this sort of airiness, this sort of diffuse daylight that's more consistent than would otherwise be the case, that became synonymous with the so-called white cube model of art galleries. And crucially, it's really the quality of light, not the presence of light, that helps shape symbolic encounters in the gallery interior. What's more, these windows were primarily thought of as a tool for the aesthetic management of internal space, not a way of socially connecting the inside and the outside. 21st century gallery design, as I'm sure you're all aware, is heavy in its use of glass and windows. This has been described as a vogue for open architecture. architect William Smart argues that the concept of openness goes beyond visual transparency and embraces how a museum can engage its community to form a social and cultural hub. The example I've included here is of Manchester's Whitworth Gallery, which was redesigned in 2015 and usefully contains artwork stating gathering of strangers. The redesign was described by critic Rowan Moore as tearing up the red tape and letting the light and the surrounding park flood in. Here again, windows manifest in the art gallery the changing cultural and social norms around the relationship between art and everyday life. The park here is flooding in. Contemporary art world value systems place this premium on perceptions of publicness and civicness as opposed to previous orders. This reaches its zenith in the contemporary vogue for curating directly onto windows, increasingly contemporary art galleries commissioning work directly on their windows, or indeed curating their internal spaces outwards so the primary viewpoint is from the street. This sort of started in COVID, but has persisted throughout post-COVID contemporary art gallery practice. In these examples, windows are a curatorial attempt to spill out of the gallery, and my previous fieldwork has shown that it really rarely lands. So how is this playing out at Tate Liverpool? Tate Liverpool's redesign was put out for tender in 2021 with an intention to update the gallery from its current configuration, or its previous configuration, which is a legacy of Sterling's conversion in the 1980s. In the invitation to tender, the purposes of the redesign is stated. Tate Liverpool is seeking an architect to reimagine the gallery space to meet the scale and ambition of today's most exciting artists, while creating social spaces that better connect with the city and its communities, creating an environment that is flexible and inviting and able to host people, art, and ideas in equal part. And that's a really useful statement for me and anyone else interested in the sociology of art gallery architecture, because it lays out in no uncertain terms the value systems that are symbolically, materially shaping public funded gallery space. And the key words are connection with the city and inviting to the public. The firm that won the commission was 6A Architects, and they did so with a promise to deliver on these priorities. How? Chiefly by opening up over 100 windows that were part of the historic dock building, but that had been bricked up by James Sterling. The illustration shows in blue windows that are currently bricked up, and in orange other openings that are currently opaque. And this accounts for 108 of the building's 200 original windows. In opening up these windows, 6A Architects are treading a delicate line between respect for the heritage of the building, also respect for the transformation of James Sterling, which no longer serves the contemporary purpose or value system of Tate, and delivering on the demands of public-oriented gallery today, under its cultural and policy imperatives to appear public. In their consultation, they interviewed members of the public at the Albert dock that told the consultants that they thought this was an abandoned building. The invitation did not stand, essentially. The design and access statement of the architects submitted and approved for planning permission had 10 priorities. Number 1 on that list is titled Opening Up the Building, and it reads, improving visibility and connections, opening windows and 1980s imitation cargo doors on all floors, communicating from all elevations to say, come in and welcome. So this is art and activity, they write, become visible from near and far. The Mersey, the historic waterfront and the dock, the weather and the seasons are present in the experience of the galleries and the social spaces inside. Although I really hope that the weather of the Mersey is not inside the gallery. In a press interview on the subject, the co-founder of 6A Architects, Stephanie McDonald, describes the redesign as flinging open the windows. She continues, what were once windowless galleries, corridors and stairways will be opened up to water. The building will become as much about the city as it is about art. Here we can see that the windows are doing almost all of the symbolic heavy lifting in the redesign. No longer, as in previous eras, are the core criteria for windows to provide conservation or particular qualities of light, even though that still sounds, but rather the windows are here to shape the social space of the gallery. Take Liverpool and the wider transformation of the Albert Dock and of Liverpool since the 1980s has positioned art and culture as a social value by virtue of its economic and touristic benefits. Countless academics and critiqued these claims. And it's these times of history that saw Block C of the Colonnades building have its windows blocked up in the service of an idea of what public art spaces should be. Today its windows are being flung open again in service of new ideas of publicness, which hinge on a visual connection between inside and out. But where is the public here? Well, here it is. Albert Dock is a privately owned asset that was sold last year to a partnership between an investment company predominantly based in Dubai and a property management company based in London. This partnership owned the leasehold for over 900 years, and they bought it from another asset management company for £40 million, which is shockingly cheap. When the architects talk about opening up the building to the surrounding public life, they are in fact talking, of course, about a space characterised by the extensive privatisation of urban space. Liverpool's streets, like many others, are a patchwork of private investments and interests, private security also, that control and limit the behaviour in these spaces. The reason for concluding with this is to stress that the vogue for opening art gallery windows that we see at Tate Liverpool and beyond requires us to ask, if windows are being thrown open in the service of publicness, what is the quality of the publicness on offer? What are the characteristics of this publicness? As well as the quality of light that concerned MoMA's early director. What are the vested interests and how do claims of windows publicness, what do claims of windows publicness actually make opaque? This conference shows just how culturally and materially potent windows are, but they are also political and plugged into the distribution of power and capital in space. Block C of the Colonnades building is, in this, a case in point.
James Gilray's 1808 satirical etching, Very Slippy Weather, depicts figures gathering to look at the latest prints in the publisher Hannah Humphrey's shop window in London. In the late 18th and throughout the 19th centuries, the display of prints in shop windows was often the first point at which people experienced a particular image. Viewing the goods on display would often be fragmented in the 18th and early 19th centuries due to the technological limitations of glass production. Window frames at the time could both frame smaller images and obstruct the view of larger prints on display. Yet, with the development and advances in plate and sheet glass technologies and the reduction of their cost, by the middle of the 19th century, shop windows became bigger, clearer, and could provide unimpeded views of the goods on display. This paper explores what happened when advances in glass production changed the way in which shop windows were made, and to what extent it impacted how Victorian print sellers and later art dealers, primarily in London, displayed their goods to people on the street. A number of images of print seller shops exist, including satirical and topographical views, advertisements, genre paintings, and later, photographs, which show how prints were probably displayed. None of these images of shop windows are unmediated views, and each was produced for a purpose. Nonetheless, taken together, representations of print shop windows reveal important information about the way in which prints were displayed throughout the 19th century. So Gilray's etching shows Hannah Humphrey's window, as was typical at the time, made of a series of panes of crown glass set in a wooden grid, with an array of unframed prints behind, apparently stuck to the glass. And conveniently, Gilray's made it so each print fits perfectly behind each pane. Other views of print shops from around 1770 to 1810 display a similar setup. In some cases, prints are stuck to fit behind each square of glass, in others they overlap. And we can see this in the Macaroni print shop of 1772. and a watercolour of Elwood's map and print warehouse of 1719. Using a window containing prints on display is both a focal point and a backdrop. We lean closer to identify the images in the window, and then we move our gaze to look at the people in front, so as to identify different characters and types. The artistic use of the print shop window as both focus and backdrop for the examination of people persisted throughout the 19th century. But glass typically wasn't used on shop fronts until the latter half of the 18th century, before which time fronts mostly opened onto the street and were closed with wooden shutters. When glass first appeared on shop windows, it was usually crown glass, produced in blown discs or crown tables of about 5 feet in diameter, which featured a bullseye or pointil. And that was usually removed when the glass was cut into smaller squares, but you can see this one in one that's been retained. And the panes were held in glass, placed by glazing bars. And if we walk around cities and towns in England, we can still see examples of this type of shop window. This is the Tobacconist, Freeburg and Traer, which is actually, it's now a gift shop on London's Haymarket. And Catherine Morrison's book, English Shops and Shopping, from the Paul Mellon, was published by the Paul Mellon Centre, provides a detailed account of the development of shop windows. So although plate glass had been used in some luxury properties since the 17th century in England, due to its cost, it was rarely used in shop fronts until after about 1840. In the 1780s, cast plate glass had to be imported to England from France, but by the following decade it was being made in Britain, and plates were measuring up to about 6 by 9 feet. In the 1830s, mass production of German sheet glass was introduced to England, yielding panes of about 4 by 3 feet. So the removal of excise duty on glass in 1845 and the repeal of window tax in 1851 meant that these large panes of glass became more affordable and more widely available. Toward the middle of the 19th century, there was a gradual shift in the production of shop windows from small panes of glass to large. And this is illustrated in John Tallis's Street Views of London. It was first published in 1838 to 40. And then again in 1847, this is an 1847 edition. And yes, you can see lots of crown glass windows, but you start seeing the larger glass windows being introduced. And so that's that moment of change. This is Oxford Street. Modern glass and its technologies have certainly become more visible. And probably the most famous example, and lots of people have spoken about it as well, being Crystal Palace of 1851, which was not only constructed from plate glass, but also contained a fountain made of 4 tons of crystal glass, as well as exhibits of new glass technologies such as plate glass measuring up to 19 by 10 feet. Isabel Armstrong in Victorian Glass Worlds calls the 19th century, quote, the era of public glass, and a century in which glass became the third or middle term. It interposed an almost invisible layer of matter between the seer and the seen. And as Walter Benjamin and others observed, the reflected glass of new spaces of commercial spectacle allowed new categories of consumer and urban passerby to see themselves anew. Yet views of print shop windows from the middle of the 19th century continue to show us images of crown glass facades, demonstrating that modern glass windows did not suddenly replace the old. Technology crept rather than leapt. In the 1840s advertisement for Samuel Knight's shop, we see on-frame prints stuck to the panes of the crown glass window, and the prints are displayed overlapping in apparently haphazard manner with a mix of caricatures, ships, horses, churches and figures. And the glazing bars on the window obstruct a clear view of many of the images. Similarly, topographical views of London streets and buildings by Thomas Hosmer Shepherd from the early 1850s show crown glass windows and similar display techniques of print to those in earlier images. And this is the premise of A&E Evans and Son, a print seller and publisher, and Francis Graham Moon's shop on Threadneedle Street. And again, you can see sort of on-frame prints behind the glass. Francis Graham Moon was one of the most prolific print sellers and publishers in the first half of the 19th century, and along with firms like Agnew's and Cornaghi's, Moon represents a moment where a generation of print sellers and publishers became key art dealers, and central to the 19th century image making and selling industry. So by the end of the 1850s, images of print shop windows made with larger panes of glass start to appear. One of the most famous is that of the shop front of the publisher dealer Henry Graves, whose premises were a £6 mile in London. Graves was another prolific publisher and dealer who commissioned contemporary artists, dealt in works of art by old masters, invested in new technology like photography, and brokered expensive art deals, whilst at the same time continuing to publish fine art print reproductions. I say that they were mostly intaglio at that stage. And the view of his shop front, called Shaftesbury Lost and Found, shows an array of prints that were published by Graves. And a mixed method engraving by Samuel Cousins after Edward Lance's print saved is framed in gold and rests on the floor of the recess on the lower right-hand corner. It's tilted towards the viewer, while other prints are stuck to the back of the window recess, unframed and overlapping. While the images of displayed in Graves' window are devices employed to comment on the plight of Victorian youth, among other things, the mix of genre demonstrates the medley of subject matter available to see in print shop windows at any one time. This overlapping and mixed display of prints, mostly unframed, echoes earlier representations of print shop windows, suggesting that dealers and publishers continued to treat prints in a similar way as before, and that despite the large panes of glass, they did not amend the way in which prints were displayed. And here are two examples, sort of larger examples of fine art print reproductions. This is after Millet, it was published by Graves. This is after Benjamin Williams Leader, and it was published by Leggett Brothers. And it's just to give you an idea, I mean, these are sort of particularly large prints. They're really expensive. Some of them are up to about £15 in about 1880, and as much as sometimes about £50 towards the end of the 19th century. So they're not cheap. So by placing multiple overlapping prints directly at or nearby the window surface, these two-dimensional objects appear even more so, effacing the space between them and their viewers. The prints became a plane of images which lose any reference to the physical space in which they may later hang. The painting Nameless and Friendless by Emily Mary Osborne shows what the selling space behind the print-lined window might have looked like. While prints line the windows overlaid in a familiar mosaic, the interior of the shop is dim, with the backs of prints translucent from the sun shining through them. By setting prints to face outwards in the window, all their form, line and tone is given to the passer-by, so a dimmer vision is experienced from the inside. Here the walls are hung with paintings and prints. A canvas leans against the table and portfolios rest on chairs, indicating that objects come and go from the space. Works in different media are shown to be mobile and imbricated without strict lines of the window to hold them in place. If images of storefronts show prints flattened and suspended so that they appear as a single plane, frameless, floating, severed, spread and displayed as a seemingly disordered sheet of imagery, then the images of interiors show spaces that open up like caves, which swallow, combine and juxtapose works in different genres of media. A tension between outside and inside occurs. If viewing on the street meant looking at a flat plane of images and participating in an illusion that they could be encountered without any distraction of space or depth, then the interior of the shop was a space for thinking about space itself, hanging, moving, mixing, framing and buying. Some images suggest that prints were treated differently to paintings in windows, as is shown in Thomas P. Hall's 1867 painting, One Touch of Nature Makes the Whole World Kin. Prints are unframed and stuck near the glass window as they were in earlier decades, but paintings, and we know these are paintings because of the hint of canvas at the back, are framed and displayed in relative isolation within the window recess. A full view is given to a painting, a view which would not have been possible behind panes of crown glass. This different treatment of media within the window appears only to be depicted in images of plate and sheet glass windows after about 1860. Another noticeable impact of glass technology is that paintings like Hall's and Osborne's could not have existed a few decades prior. The expanse of glass allowed for a new way of framing people, either on the street or from within the shop. Both yield an expanse of glass that gives an unimpeded view, not just of artworks, but of people. Here, glass technology has changed the work of art itself. The different treatment of prints and paintings in windows is consistent with the way in which publisher dealers invested in and marketed their stock in the second half of the 19th century. While they invested and sold in works made in different media and by different technologies, they often separated them by method of display and advertisement. This photograph of Arthur Tooth and Sons, taken in 1884, shows their shop front with framed oil paintings on the left-hand side and unframed prints on the right. The sign, Dealers in Works of Art, appears above the window containing paintings, and print sellers and publishers above the window containing prints, creating a sense of grouping and titling by medium. The window containing paintings is hung only one row high, so that 4 or 5 framed oil paintings sit in one row and line the back and side walls, while 3 paintings are displayed on the floor of the window. The window recess is shown in more detail in a late 19th century painting by Orselli called Outside Arthur Tooth. The paintings on the floor of the recess are tilted so as to be easily seen from the street. In this image, only one large framed oil is hung on the back wall, with further paintings on either side, and the walls of the recess are hung with a dark material which gives an impression of a hanging wall in a formal gallery space, such as the Royal Academy. And we know the Royal Academy used, there were some notes about sort of the colours of material that they used, and we also know that in the 19th century art dealers were sort of trying to rival Academy space as well. The central painting in this window, which depicts Venice, almost vibrates and pops with bright blues against the dark curtain. While the window containing paintings appears ordered and curated to our modern eyes, the prints appear disordered, creating a far more challenging environment for the eye to settle on a single image. The prints and paintings exist in the same space, and yet they do not. This method of display persisted into the 20th century, as is shown, and this is Goupil, who, this is their shop in The Hague, but they had shops in Paris and some dealerships in London as well. And these are of 1901 and 1905. So, undoubtedly, the treatment of media within the window was also tied to perceptions and realities of value, which in turn was tied to concepts of originality, as well as practicalities like size, shape and weight. While Arthur Tooth's prints were expensive, they were significantly less so than oil paintings that he sold. While there was a demarcation of each medium as part of a hierarchy, the proximity of prints and paintings allowed them to be sold in the same space and to enter into visual conversation in dealers' windows. One further impact of glass technology, coupled with advances in print technology, is as prints became larger, so too did their frames, and the dealers' agnews, their archives are at the National Gallery. And what you can see from about the 1880s, about half the people that were purchasing these expensive prints were also purchasing frames and the glass, which cost half as much again. So away from the window and the selling space and into a home, the print was once again framed by a large sheet of glass, one which would not have been possible a few decades before. So to conclude, what do these images tell us about the display of fine art prints in the second half of the 19th century? That even if windows became clearer, bigger and yielded unimpeded views, the display of prints themselves, usually unframed, overlapping, adhered to glass or the recess, had not really changed since the late 18th century. This is true even as late as the 1920s, and this is Rudolf Ackermann's shop on Regent Street in London. And Ackermann, it was a long time sort of dealer and publisher of prints. And it shows a similar display method to that over a century before in Hannah Humphrey's shop window. So not only does this image show how more traditional images and methods of image production persisted, but also that their display remained largely unchanged, even if the shop window had undergone modification itself. However, where we do see change is as the print sellers increasingly dealt in other media, including oils, they used their windows to frame the more expensive works of art in a different way, with more space, an uninterrupted view, framed and with less visual competition. So while traditional methods of display persisted, new and what we might even call modern methods of display, and I say modern in quotes, also emerged. Yet far from the idea of a determinist view of art history, where one new technology or method replaces the other, we see long periods of overlap, both in terms of technology and display, well into the 20th century.
Thank you. Good morning. One day in March 2024, I crossed the traffic light at Oxford Street when my interest was caught by a shop window at Selfridges. A woman was sitting in bed while watching TV. I had never before seen anything like that. What exactly was she doing in the window and why? I wasn't the only one to stop and watch. People took photos and filmed her with their smartphones. I went inside and spoke with her. I will unveil details later. This experience sparked important questions regarding the role of shop windows in society. My main questions, which I reflect upon today, are: how do shop windows and their storytelling challenge predominant cultural traditions regarding objects, situations, and behaviors as a melting pot of commercial endeavor, art display, and performance, which is their part in a dynamic process of negotiation of cultural traditions. After my introduction, I will present 3 case studies. The first is Liam Yeat's presentation in a Soho gallery window in 2002. The second is the Selfridges shop window, and the third is Atelier EB's work at Cromwell Place in 2024. I will end my reflections with concluding short thoughts. What do shop windows, people, and traditions have to do with one another? Shop windows are associated with something new and extraordinary and reflecting changing fashions. They function as evidence of cultural practices, showing familiar scenes and at the same time confront us with new cultural practices. In order to attract attention, shop windows have to stand out. They are not only locations of storytelling, but provocateurs. A provocateur, as defined by the Cambridge Dictionary, is, quote, someone who intentionally causes arguments and discussions or intentionally makes other people feel angry, offended, or uncomfortable, end quote. A famous example, and I'm sure most of you know that maybe, a famous example is Salvador Dali's work for New York's department store Bonaventilla in 1939. The Fifth Avenue store had commissioned Dali with 2 window displays but ended the collaboration when customers complained about the extreme windows with the personified Narcissus and hands holding mirrors and reaching out of a bathtub lined with black lambskin, amongst others. The scandal was perfect when unauthorized modifications by the staff caused Dali to take action, which resulted in him and the bathtub falling through the window. Dali was charged with disorderly conduct. The press coverage stirred opinion. The Time magazine described Dali as the dapper, delirious Catalonian and his display as havoc-making Freudian designs. Window dressing is defined by Oxford Languages as, quote, the arrangement of an attractive display in a shop window, end quote. I want to highlight that displays in shop windows are much more than that. Through my case studies, I demonstrate that provocation is key and how shop windows intentionally cause irritation and make people feel uncomfortable in the sense that their values, ideas, and behaviors are questioned. Roland Barthes' punctum, thematized by Claudine Izet in 1993, specifically in relation to Benetton advertisement campaigns, holds true equally for window displays. My approach to shop windows is interdisciplinary. In my case studies, I analyze which objects are presented and how, before reflecting upon who gets involved in what, where, and how. The location and cultural traditions which a shop window is embedded in are crucial as a framework for interpretation. A social anthropological perspective adds important insights as so far underrepresented perspectives and cultural backgrounds shine new light onto how cultural traditions, ideas, and behavior are challenged by shop windows. For my analysis, I employ methods used in ethnography, namely observation, participant observation, interview, photography, and taking notes. I include material that is published online, or auto-ethnographical elements appear when I refer to own memories. Shop windows are omnipresent and important in everyday city life. The fascination with fast-paced novelty is not new. The Guide to Window Dressing for the Drapery Trade, published in London in 1883, describes shop windows to be exciting attractions, sources of knowledge, and provocateurs of people's reactions. Quote, "The shops which line our streets have always had their worshippers, from the simple rustic who stands open-mouthed on beholding windows decked with so much wealth, to the peripatetic philosopher who has a name and a price for every article displayed before his critical eye. But during recent years, these shops have far exceeded the bounds of expectation, representing the most gorgeous artistic decoration. The magnificent window panes, a source of so much pride and pleasure to the connoisseur." End quote. Department store shop windows represent a change of tradition themselves and came into being after the mid-19th century with the advent of retail and wholesale business based on international capital, industrial production, and the mass distribution and turnover capabilities of railroads. Shelley Rice describes the department store as the commercial sibling of the Universal Exhibitions, a repository of both domestic and foreign goods, a window onto far-flung worlds, and points out that changes of people's habits are connected. Design as an agent of social change, such as discussed by Ben Highmore 2008, includes shop windows. These have been placed at the center of the historical stage by Wolfgang Schievelbusch in 1983, who stresses a lively interaction between humans and things. The relationship between humans and experiences between humans and objects and the emotions they involve have been assessed by Hideo Hama in 2019 in a publication as part of the series Window Sociology by the Window Research Institute in Japan. W.G.T. Mitchell regards buildings and landscapes as legitimate objects of visual culture because they are looked at frequently, and in 1995 defines visual culture as the study of the cultural construction of visual experience in everyday life. What follows from this is a twofold importance of windows as part of visual culture, as well as people's active role in constructing the shop window's visual experience in the everyday. The case studies. Case 1, Soho's Brink Gallery. The image subtitle reads, "Max Watley and Max Sacreta kissing in bed. They will spend the next week in the display window of a central London art gallery." Robert Stansfield starts this Guardian article about Liam Yeats' artwork like this. Do you maybe feel disturbed? During the live art show at Soho's Brink Gallery, Poland Street in 2002, a couple slept and, quote, even made love in front of an audience of passers-by, end quote, near to a condom machine. Attention was raised. What was the provocation? An intimate, usually private situation was elevated to be a public event visible for every passerby. This and the condom machine caused at least irritation of probably most onlookers, as borders were pushed by ignoring the cultural tradition of hiding intimacy. The idea of not openly staring at people was challenged by passers-by being able to watch as long as they wanted. Schievelbusch's panoramic perception, an effect of dissociation produced by window technology lying between humans and objects, also, following window sociologist Hama, explains the staring at people. A window enables onlookers more easily to take a distance or to get involved by looking closely and reflect upon what is shown. New perspectives onto sex in public and art might change future behavior. Following Stansfield, the exhibition was meant to be a reflection of love and sex in Britain, reinforcing the idea of practicing safe sex, and was inspired by the public's obsession with sex and voyeurism. The gallery window was a reflection of cultural practices as well as a provocation. The display's environment matters. Due to Soho's history as an entertainment district and its gay community, the window theme itself was probably not as much a challenge for Soho regulars as for visitors and tourists. Case 2. The Selfridges, Oxford Street. The 2024 Selfridges shop window featured designer Martine Rowe's shoe collection for Clarks in a performative display in the corner shop, which is known for showcasing in an especially innovative way. Also, in this case, intimacy in public was key. Whereas nakedness might not be challenging for some, a young woman in bed with black stockings and short pants, nestling with her pearl necklace in a Selfridges shop window might be challenging for others. The day I visited, I heard various languages, Arabic and Chinese being prominent. Young men took photos. Cross-cultural and cross-regional analysis, which is common practice in international product marketing, yet has to be included into the study of shop windows and their performance and function in culture and society. The statement that society shapes windows and windows shape society by the Japanese Window Research Institute also holds true for shop windows. Shop windows produce ever-increasing levels of provocation in order to attract attention and to be multiplied in social media to start with. The Instagrammability is crucial for avoiding to drown unnoticed into anonymity. When I spoke with a woman in the window, she said she would not care being photographed and commented that I was the only one who had asked for permission. Asked if she would pose dressed in underwear only, she clearly disagreed. For her, the shop window was a terrain of negotiating cultural traditions, just as it was for the spectators who judged this scene to be exciting enough to take photos and post them on social media. The behavior in front of shop windows changed, just as expectations regarding displays, the more wow the better, as spectacular photos and sites increased the attractiveness of a social media account and its owner. Glenn Adamson comments in a 2018 Frieze magazine article, quote, "The windows are still commercial art. Their purpose is to pull crowds into the store, an ever higher priority today given the migration of sales from brick and mortar to online. Yet they also perform on social media. Framed behind glass, each window is an Instagram-ready image, an invitation from Bergdorf to its customers to do their advertising for them." End quote. Shop windows might also be provocative by holding on to traditions and exaggerating their appearance despite life-changing and life-threatening situations for people around the world. The 2024 Selfridges Christmas window motto is "Brighter, bolder, glitter. This festive season, it's more the merrier." And my third case is Cromwell Place. In 2024, fashion label Atelier EB, designer Becca Lipscomb and artist Lucy McKenzie presented their collection at Lavery Studio at Cromwell Place, South Kensington, in a shop window which was especially built for that purpose. Visitors or consumers were able to buy the products. Rosalind Diana commented in her Plaster magazine article, Atelier EB, make an art of window shopping. A mucky relationship between art and retail is mentioned in the introduction. Discussions about Atelier EB's exhibitions or shop windows circle around art, commerce, and fashion. Atelier Ibis' work challenged the borderline between art/commerce and fashion/commerce. Glenn Adamson's words when writing about Bergdorf Goodman's fit in here. Quote, "We often hear of art's struggle with its own commodity status. Less frequently do we stop to notice the way art and commerce actively mimic one another's operations." End quote. Atelier Ibis' exhibition or pop-up store at the Museum Tinguely in Basel in 2024 was titled Fresh Window, The Art of Display and the Display of Art. The future of shop windows. The latest development is a transformation from static product displays to immersive AR window shopping experiences. George Yashin, founder and CEO of 010, writes about window shopping 2.0, visual concept versus interactivity. Virtual try-on is offered with an AR magic mirror in public, interweaving retail and entertainment. So you can see someone from the outside in front of this shop window and magic mirror. Research shows that shop windows' attractiveness increases with this new technology. Shop windows continue to provoke changes in cultural traditions, people's ideas, and behavior. My reflections today highlight that shop windows are much more than a glimpse in passing. Shop windows are omnipresent and challenging provocateurs between art, commerce, and cultural traditions, causing emotions, controversial discussion, and changing behavior. Thank you.
Regarding honesty, I have to say, with the Soho shop window, there was a curtain which the couple could close while they were being in whatever kind of action. No? But then in the article, it wasn't said until somewhere towards the end. And in the images, press images and others, you also wouldn't see that curtain. So on purpose, it was given as if you could really see everything they were doing. No?
Interesting. I didn't know, yeah, because it's the absence of the curtain which makes those, and the Martine Rose. I mean, that's a kind of, you're looking into somebody's bedroom there, but was there a curtain with that work? Right, right.
I was just going to comment that the curtain, the reason that I had that image in there was because I was going to hazard some comments on an earlier period in art history, which is not my area, so I took it out. But in the contemporary art gallery, curtains are still a sort of part of the social practice when they are used to turn a white cube into a black box, essentially, when the demands of contemporary art mean that the luminous context needs it to be dark rather than light. So again, it's sort of a way of tracking changing practices in contemporary art as well.
And I'm just thinking back over, and there were lots of images I didn't show of galleries, both interior and exteriors, and I can't think of curtains in any windows depicted in any windows in front of them. You get, as we've seen, you do get material. But I mean, I can think of curtains in front of works of art sort of within spaces for various reasons, either modesty or protection or spectacle, but not actually in the window itself.
Although I think in a couple of images there were curtains at the back of the display, which is sort of pushing the threshold back in some way.
So I'm sort of, I guess I'm calling, so that material, it seems to be around the back of the window recess and sometimes used as the hanging material. But I don't know if it could have been drawn, because sometimes the material, you seem to get material on the base of the window recess, but I don't know if that can be, if that can be drawn or not.
Yeah, because I guess that's kind of a key element of the dynamic, and provocation is, that's the term, Birgitta, that you were kind of bringing into play, seems key across all these things. You know, the images, Alexandra, that you're showing with people kind of astonished and looking at this, and in a way, there's the lack of a curtain is a kind of breakdown between the public and the private, and it's giving you access. If you're an urchin, you get to see prints or works of art which don't kind of belong to you, and I guess that's within the contemporary, the public art gallery. That's in play as well, isn't it? You're giving access or opening up. Okay. Do we have questions from the floor? I think do please wait for the microphone at the back there.
Oh, hello. Thank you. Sorry. Yeah. Thank you for very interesting talks. In some ways, it seems to me it's almost back to the future, because in the early modern period, shops didn't have glass at all. They were just sort of counters open to the street. And when you closed the shop, you would have a big sort of wooden door that you would drop down. And the spectacle was in some ways even more greater than now, because you'd actually see goldsmiths and bootmakers, shoemakers at work. And part of that was to show that they were doing things correctly and weren't using proper materials. And they also, they would have pretty young women from the countryside, and this is Paris in the 17th century, who would be there to attract as many customers as possible. And so, so I wonder what you think about that, whether, you know, there is a kind of that shopping in some ways has always involved spectacle, and being able to see what's going on.
I definitely agree with that. And I think also when you did start getting larger panes of glass in shop windows, as I understand it, they were still sort of often putting boards in front, so they weren't getting smashed. So there'd still be sort of some element of revealing. But what really struck me when I was thinking about a lot about art gallery windows in general, and you know, once you get to sort of White Cube and Mason's Yard, you don't have many windows at all. And it struck me, you know, walking around St James's and all the galleries, some of the very contemporary galleries didn't have anything in their windows, you know. So when I was sort of talking and saying, you know, modern display with a single oil painting, that's not actually really modern now, the way we think about it. So absolutely, I think, yes, it's always been about spectacle, but it's got to a point perhaps now where the spectacle is, or the surprise is not even having windows or anything in the window. But then thinking about papers yesterday where shopping centres didn't have windows and suddenly they are again. So I wonder if there is a sort of cyclical movement to start and opening up bricked up windows. So yeah, I think it's changing again.
And how would people be able to see prints through crown glass? It would be very blurred, wouldn't it?
I mean, I think they are, from what I can see in some of the images, they are actually adhered to the glass.
Yeah.
So I think you could, and sort of, I mean, looking at crown glass now, sort of still existing, and you can tell it's crown by sort of the way it looks. You can see through it. I think that wouldn't stop you, and also I think that's why you sort of see people pressing up against windows as well. But I don't think, as I understand it, that would impede the view.
And I wanted to add as well regarding spectacle. I read about I saw images where young women were like seamstresses working in the window, no? And I think regarding my theme, the new thing is really that, for example, with the Selfridges window, as I didn't know Clark's. I'm not familiar with every aspect of British culture yet, so I didn't know what it was for. So I saw this woman, which didn't have to do anything with anything for me. I didn't know what was she doing there, and it was until later that I grasped the idea. Whereas if I would see a seamstress in a shop who's selling clothes, I would instantly know she's doing that work properly, or a shoe person who's doing repairing shoes. I would know what they are doing. But with this window, it's a kind of out of context presentation where it takes, for people like me, some time to figure out what it's about. So.
And just a comment on spectacle and labour and its relationship to windows in the art gallery. The main thrust of my research is actually into gallery technicians and the hidden labour of art galleries. And previous to now, it would typically be the case that a public art gallery like the ones I talk about would obscure the work of the gallery technicians at work. They would keep that sort of hidden in order to have this big reveal at the end. Increasingly, you'll notice, I've noticed that work is now being exposed, and in fact, often decals are being put on the gallery window saying, look at our technicians at work. I'm not sure anyone's actually asked the technicians if they want to be watched whilst they work. But again, there's this changing relationship between labour, visibility and value in the contemporary arts.
And actually, just to step in there, thinking about glass production and the physical labour, and I'm not a glass historian, I should add, I'm not a historian, and the physical labour behind glass production, the physical labour behind the prints, and actually it could sometimes take kind of a year or so, or even longer, all of the different people involved in producing a plate, specialist printers, paper makers, and I think there is a real sense of that human labour even in the sort of middle towards the second half of the 19th century being obscured. You don't see it unless you know about it.
From an anthropological point of view, also, I was wondering about all the people being involved, no? Like window cleaners. Who thinks about window cleaners? Yeah. And the dust maybe within the window. How is it prepared? How is the lining? All these many details. And equally, the people looking at windows, they are very different. So you have cultural different groups. You have got, even if it's white British people, there are many differences. And then depending on the area as well, are you in Soho? Are you in Hackney? Are you on Oxford Street or New Bond Street? So much many themes to investigate.
Over on the side.
Thank you. I enjoyed all the papers very much, and I'm interested in this relationship between windows and the interior. And given there's so much focus nowadays on the experience, whether it's of shopping or museums or galleries, I wonder if there's a correlation between this opening up of windows and or with some shops, with some galleries not actually having anything in the window, but open windows giving a view into the space. I wonder if for shops there's also, if people are actually going to the shop, then it's more focus on the experience inside rather than, if you're there already, you're going to go in. I was trying to think of some examples. The only one that came to mind, don't know if it's a good example, is H&M with these red kind of, don't know if anyone's seen these big red sort of turnstiles. They're inside the shop. So once you've entered, you go around these sort of red velvet things. I've seen that in a couple of their shops, but their windows are nothing special. So I wondered if any of you have noticed a correlation there.
Definitely in the 19th century, there are lots. There are some images of the interiors of print shops or art dealers' shops, and they seem to be less ordered as you go inside, as in the you get the oil paintings on one side and prints on the other, or they're sort of separated. once you get into the interior, somewhere like Agnew's, first of all, some of the dealers actually make their interiors look a bit like someone's study. So there's this sort of movement to the home. You also see things much more mixed. So there are stereoscopic views of Nerdler, who were another sort of big art dealer in North America. And it's a bit of a mess. There's masses and masses of things on the walls. So I think there is this sort of, it's weird with prints because things are overlapping, but there is this order. And you'll see art dealers, Gambart is investing in photography and he's producing sort of lithographic volumes, but none of them really overlap. So I think they've got their fingers in lots of pies. The window keeps that separate, but once you're inside, there's a mix. And we absolutely know that buyers in the 19th century, and we see from stockbooks, somebody that's buying an expensive oil painting is also buying a replica by the artist. They're also buying a photograph. They're also buying a print. And you can then see Agnew's go along, and they also help with hanging and framing services. And they're talking about putting a photograph or a painting or a print on a wall. So actually, we like to have things sort of separated by medium, and the window sort of does that. But once you're inside the shop, there's more of a mix. And once you're inside the buyer's home, there's also a mix in where they're mixing up the media, as we would expect. And I think there's this sort of real people like an order to things, but there actually isn't in terms of display. I don't think as much when you're looking, but I think certainly in the 19th century there were some of the top dealers were making their spaces, deliberately making it look like an interior of a home. But I think there are others where it is just a shop with goods in it. And certainly even in the 19th century, people are saying, oh, these shop fronts, it could be a print seller, it could be somebody selling clothes. And I think that sort of formalization of type, I think, doesn't happen until later in the century, where you get sort of really, dare I say it, kind of curated windows. It's sort of, it seems to be emerging to me.
And regarding Selfridges, all the other Selfridges windows are different. They are really like windows, and you wouldn't see the inside of the shop. Whereas with this corner shop, you saw the shop. So if I would have looked carefully, I would have seen the shoe boxes, but I was completely absorbed by this woman in the window as well, no? So she was somehow sitting in the window, but at the same time, it was the shop. So it was not very clear. It's one big room and a lot to look at, actually. So you were confused, and maybe that was a provocation, no? That you didn't have this definition as you just explained.
Yeah, and I use the word atmosphere when I'm thinking about these things, and that's very purposefully to tap into some emerging theory in sociology and anthropology that maybe is a little late to the game, but is starting to offer sort of explanations of how atmosphere is a sort of primary category of perception, and how all social action is atmospherically mediated. And it's important, I think, to stress that the atmosphere that the Tate redesign is trying to animate is on the sort of perimeter of the building, which the circulation spaces are being rerouted to the perimeter. So this convivial atmosphere of liveliness and the Mercier and all of this will be sort of into these social spaces where there's going to be a cafe, a shop, a learning space, a lunchroom for school visits and this sort of thing. Still to a degree insulated from the display capacity that will be located now more centrally.
Okay. I think Rebecca first, and then we have a second line. Sorry. Rebecca first, and then we'll come to you.
I suppose this is mostly a question for Laura. In terms of the window, the shop front window is showing generally conventional ideas of attractiveness. The mannequins are a certain shape. The woman who is there on the bed is a conventionally attractive person from a certain background. And the museum, this idea of opening up the museum. Well, first, I find it interesting that, these are contemporary art galleries, which I think are more likely to attract wider audiences than traditional art galleries, museums, which I know has been a problem. I know we've talked about this at the Paul Mellon Center. How do you bring new audiences into a building that doesn't have very many windows facing out, that people can't see what's going on? You just have to get them into the building. But I was also struck this idea of liveliness and that you can see people in the windows is going to be most visible at night when the museum is illuminated, probably for private events, probably for cocktail things, where you have those conventionally and traditional audiences maybe, and whether you've kind of reflected on that. And I think you kind of hinted at, are these really opening up the spaces to new audiences, or what is it doing otherwise? So I wondered if you could kind of comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, you make a great point. And like I say, this is really early stage of this research project. The building obviously hasn't opened yet, so I haven't been able to do any empirical work. Of course, the Tate operates in a nighttime economy in the area, and they do Tate lates as well to try and tap into this this sort of economy in the local context there. I think one of the things that I'm trying to pick out, and obviously I don't want to say too much about this building because it hasn't opened yet, so I can't, is that there is a heavy amount of policing that goes on in and through these architectural inventions that are designed to do the exact opposite of that. Where, for example, in other buildings that I won't name check, similar architectural interventions in order to give out onto the street, whilst you might begin to notice that now often interventions in art galleries, when you walk through the front door, there will be a wall in front of you that will channel you in a certain way. And people without a fixed address are finding it more difficult to use the facilities in these buildings because there is a heavy police. Once you've opened the windows, that policing tends to happen by people. So if the architecture isn't doing it, the gallery is still doing it by having staff positioned there. They might be security staff or they might be welcome staff or whatever, but that policing is still there. It's just being done differently.
Okay, and then we have the third row.
Okay, so what I wanted to point out was an observation I made when living in a much warmer climate in Thailand. It's in shopping centers, they become sort of a place of entertainment for people. You go for a walk in the shopping center, basically. They're huge and it's hot and humid outside, so you actually go to a shopping center for a walk. And in those shopping centers, I found that there was quite a lot of competition in the windows to attract people, because you have sort of hundreds of shops in some of them because they're huge. And this sort of idea of, you know, how when you have basically two thresholds, one to get into the shopping center and then one into the shop. So how do you attract people's attention? I think that's an interesting subject for investigation potentially, even though it doesn't fit into the British context so much, because we probably don't do that sort of thing here because it's not so hot.
You say that, but I was really surprised I ventured to Westfield once and only once. And I was really, and it was Saturday or Sunday, and it was absolutely heaving. And it wasn't just people shopping. There were people with sort of young children or sort of almost newborns. And I was thinking, why would you take your toddler to a really busy shopping center? And they were hanging out. So I think you're right. I think actually that sort of shopping mall culture, I think, is sort of definitely moving to Britain in terms of you go and hang out in a shopping mall.
Do you have time if there's one or two more comments or questions? Down in the second row here.
Thank you, everyone, for the presentations. And it's more of a comment. And I was very grateful to you, Laura, for bringing up this question of labor, because I felt like it was really the missing link. Also, because you ended with the question of what do these windows obscure, and that's kind of a big question. And I was thinking around, you know, how Arts Council applications these days, the main focus is on outreach, on bringing in new audiences, and also in engaging with groups who are marginalized, or basically tethering an art context with a social motivation. And the question is like, why, and what's the function that art is asking to fulfill here? And I guess bigger institutions have the same thing. It's about drawing in audiences, and the question is about quantity somehow. We need to reach as many people as we can to fulfill the funding criteria. And the question of whether these audiences want to be reached or not is never put. And obviously this happens
you know, behind the backdrop of a neoliberal politics where other social bodies are being, again, like defunded. And so this pressure is put on a cultural sector who's not trained, not qualified to even deliver these outcomes. And but that's somehow, I guess, behind this kind of weird contradiction between public and private that you were pointing out, but in the kind of the backdrop of the real estate question, who owns these buildings and who is this even a public space? It's not really. And yeah, it reminded me of this book by Aruna de Souza called Imperfect Solidarities, and she kind of talks about transparency being like a condition of empathy building, and that we are asked to be completely transparent, to share, to overshare in order for there to be the condition of empathy and then the condition of political or social action. And she kind of, she in contrast suggests opacity and suggests that there should be solidarity on the basis of opacity. We don't have to bear our all to expect empathy or solidarity from our other, like our co-humans. And yeah, this is more of a comment, but I was really grateful to this question of labor in the midst of it, and labor, you know, in these former industrial buildings where we're kind of made to think labor has vanished, this has disappeared from these buildings, but actually it's deeply embedded. And what is it actually? What does it serve?
No, I wholeheartedly agree. And in not this research, but previous research where my window fascination was what first began, the street-facing window was referred to as the shop window, and it caused a great deal of frustration because for the curatorial staff, because where it might capture the glance or more than glance of the passers-by, who were sort of coded to expect a shop window, but in fact got some kind of curious art exhibit. Those moments of curiosity weren't something that the gallery could then capture as data to tell the Art Council what they were doing. So strategies were then needed to bring those people physically inside in order to make that interaction valuable in multiple different ways and to serve multiple different interests. So thank you for your comment, and I'll take the name of the book from you in a moment.
And that point, I just would like to add, with the AR magic mirror, this company 010 is also collecting data. So it's not just one way that you can dress and you can see yourself, but they're also collecting all sorts of data. So I couldn't find exactly what on their homepage.
They weren't transparent about that.
So you would exactly have this interaction, at least for them knowingly. No, you as a consumer wouldn't know if you don't read the homepage properly. But
yeah, great point.
Well, do we have one more question? Yeah, that's quite interesting. You can wait for that.
Yeah, sorry. Because it sees the window as a two-way thing. You talk a lot about people looking in, but actually it's about the shop looking out at the people looking in and recording their data. So that kind of two-way thing is quite important. Yeah. So
basically, it looks as if in former times it was the paintings depicting people looking into the window, and now it's simply other technology, new technology.
Well, we have benefited from the labour of our three panelists this morning with three really kind of fascinating presentations, taking us from the high street to the print shop to take Liverpool and beyond. And I think kind of with the discussion there, which flowed so easily, interesting connections, which I wouldn't necessarily anticipated, but obviously a very well kind of curated panel. But so we are able then to take a break. We can continue the conversation. We resume at 12 o'clock.
Yes, and just because we're wrapping up a little bit earlier for coffee, which will be, if you go back through where you registered, there's another quote. They're just setting it up still at the moment. So just make your way leisurely, use the facilities, and it will be set up soon.
And with that, please, thank you to our panel.